1. I bow to Govinda, whose nature is bliss supreme. Who is the Sadguru, who can be known only from the import of all Vedanta, and who is beyond the reach of speech and mind. 2. For all beings a human birth is difficult to obtain. More so is a male body. Rarer than that is Brahmanahood. Rarer still is the attachment to the path of Vedic religion. Higher than this is erudition in the scriptures. Discrimination between the self and not self. Realization. And continuing in a state of identity with Brahman, these come next in order. This kind of mukti, liberation, is not to be attained except through the well-earned merits of 100 crore of births. 3. These are three things which are rare indeed and are due to the grace of God, namely, a human birth, the longing for liberation, and the protecting care of a perfected sage. 4. The man who, having by some means obtained a human birth, with a male body and mastery of the Vedas to boot, is foolish enough not to exert himself for self-liberation, verily commits suicide, for he kills himself by clinging to things unreal. 5. What greater fool is there than the man who, having obtained a rare human body, and a masculine body too, neglects to achieve the real end of this life? 6. Let people quote the scriptures and sacrifice to the gods. Let them perform rituals and worship the deities. But there is no liberation without the realization of one's identity with the Atman. No, not even in the lifetime of 100 Brahmas put together. 7. There is no hope of immortality by means of riches, such indeed is the declaration of the Vedas. Hence it is clear that works cannot be the cause of liberation. 8. Therefore the man of learning should strive his best for liberation, having renounced his desire for pleasures from external objects, duly approaching a good and generous preceptor, and fixing his mind on the truth inculcated by him. 9. Having attained the Yogaruda state, one should recover oneself, immersed in the sea of birth and death by means of devotion to right discrimination. 10. Let the wise and erudite man, having commenced the practice of the realization of the Atman, give up all works and try to cut loose the bonds of birth and death. 11. Work leads to purification of the mind, not to perception of the reality. The realization of truth is brought about by discrimination and not in the least by 10 million of acts. 12. By adequate reasoning the conviction of the reality about the rope is gained, which puts an end to the great fear and misery caused by the snake worked up in the deluded mind. 13. The conviction of the truth is seen to proceed from reasoning upon the salutary counsel of the wise, and not by bathing in the sacred waters, nor by gifts, nor by 100 pranayamas. Control of the vital force. 14. Success depends essentially on a qualified aspirant. Time, place and other such means are but auxiliaries in this regard. 15. Hence the seeker after the reality of the Atman should take to reasoning. After duly approaching the Guru, who should be the best of the knowers of Brahman, and an ocean of mercy. 16. An intelligent and learned man skilled in arguing in favor of the scriptures and in refuting counter-arguments against them. One who has got the above characteristics is the fit recipient of the knowledge of the Atman. 17. The man who discriminates between the real and the unreal, whose mind is turned away from the unreal, who possesses calmness and the allied virtues, and who is longing for liberation, is alone considered qualified to inquire after Brahman. 18. Regarding this, sages have spoken of 4 means of attainment, which alone being present, the devotion to Brahman succeeds, and in the absence of which it fails. 19. First is enumerated discrimination between the real and the unreal. Next comes aversion to the enjoyment of fruits of one's actions, here and hereafter. Next is the group of 6 attributes, viz., calmness and the rest, and, last, is clearly the yearning for liberation. 20. A firm conviction of the mind to the effect that Brahman is real and the universe unreal is designated as discrimination, viveka, between the real and the unreal. 21. Vairagya or renunciation is the desire to give up all transitory enjoyments, ranging from those of an animate body to those of Brahmahood, having already known their defects from observation, instruction and so forth. 22. The resting of the mind steadfastly on its goal, viz. Brahman, after having detached itself from manifold sense objects by continually observing their defects, is called shama or calmness. 23. Turning both kinds of sense organs away from sense objects and placing them in their respective centers is called dhamma or self-control. The best uparati or self-withdrawal consists in the mind function ceasing to be affected by external objects. 24. The bearing of all afflictions without caring to redress them, being free, at the same time, from anxiety or lament on their score, is called taitiksha or forbearance. 25. Acceptance by firm judgment as true of what the scriptures and the Guru instruct, is called by sages shraddha or faith, by means of which the reality is perceived. 26. Not the mere indulgence of thought, in curiosity, but the constant concentration of the intellect, or the affirming faculty, on the ever-pure Brahman, is what is called samadhana or self-settledness. 27. Mumukshuta or yearning for freedom is the desire to free oneself, by realizing one's true nature, from all bondages, from that of egoism to that of the body, bondages superimposed by ignorance. 28. Even though torpid or mediocre, this yearning for freedom, through the grace of the Guru, may bear fruit, being developed by means of vairagya, renunciation, shama, calmness, and so on. 29. In his case, verily, whose renunciation and yearning for freedom are intense, calmness and the other practices have really their meaning and bear fruit. 30. Where, however, this renunciation and yearning for freedom are torpid, their calmness and the other practices are as mere appearances, like water in a desert. 31. Among things conducive to liberation, devotion, bhakti, holds the supreme place. The seeking after one's real nature is designated as devotion. 32. Others maintain that the inquiry into the truth of one's own self is devotion. The inquirer about the truth of the Atman who is possessed of the above-mentioned means of attainment should approach a wise preceptor, who confers emancipation from bondage. 33. Who is versed in the Vedas, sinless, unsmitten by desire and a knower of Brahman par excellence, who has withdrawn himself into Brahman, who is calm, like fire that has consumed its fuel, who is a boundless reservoir of mercy that knows no reason, and a friend of all good people who prostrate themselves before him. 34. Worshipping that Guru with devotion, and approaching him, when he is pleased with prostration, humility and service, he should ask him what he has got to know. 35. O Master, O friend of those that bow to thee, thou ocean of mercy, I bow to thee, save me, fallen as I am into this sea of birth and death, with a straightforward glance of thine eye, which sheds nectar like grace supreme. 36. Save me from death, afflicted as I am by the unquenchable fire of this world forest, and shaken violently by the winds of an untoward lot, terrified and so seeking refuge in thee, for I do not know of any other man with whom to seek shelter. 37. There are good souls, calm and magnanimous, who do good to others as does the spring, and who, having themselves crossed this dreadful ocean of birth and death, help others also to cross the same, without any motive whatsoever. 38. It is the very nature of the magnanimous to move of their own accord towards removing others' troubles. Here, for instance, is the moon who, as everybody knows, voluntarily saves the earth parched by the flaming rays of the sun. 39. O Lord, with thy nectar-like speech, sweetened by the enjoyment of the elixir-like bliss of Brahman, pure, cooling to a degree, issuing in streams from thy lips as from a pitcher, and delightful to the ear, do thou sprinkle me who am tormented by worldly afflictions as by the tongues of a forest fire. Blessed are those on whom even a passing glance of thy eye lights, accepting them as thine own. 40. How to cross this ocean of phenomenal existence? What is to be my fate? And which of the means should I adopt? As to these I know nothing. Condescend to save me, O Lord, and describe at length how to put an end to the misery of this relative existence. 41. As he speaks thus, tormented by the afflictions of the world, which is like a forest on fire, and seeking his protection, the saint eyes him with a glance softened with pity and spontaneously bids him give up all fear. 42. To him who has sought his protection, thirsting for liberation, who duly obeys the injunctions of the Scriptures, who is of a serene mind, and endowed with calmness, to such a one, the sage proceeds to inculcate the truth out of sheer grace. 43. Fear not, O learned one, there is no death for thee. There is a means of crossing this sea of relative existence. That very way by which sages have gone beyond it, I shall inculcate to thee. 44. There is a sovereign means which puts an end to the fear of relative existence. Through that thou wilt cross the sea of samsara and attain the supreme bliss. 45. Reasoning on the meaning of the Vedanta leads to efficient knowledge, which is immediately followed by the total annihilation of the misery born of relative existence. 46. Faith, Shraddha, devotion and the yoga of meditation, these are mentioned by the Shruti as the immediate factors of liberation in the case of a seeker. Whoever abides in these gets liberation from the bondage of the body, which is the conjuring of ignorance. 47. It is verily through the touch of ignorance that thou who art the Supreme Self findest thyself under the bondage of the non-self, whence alone proceeds the round of births and deaths. The fire of knowledge, kindled by the discrimination between these two, burns up the effects of ignorance together with their root. 48. Condescend to listen, O Master, to the question I am putting to thee. I shall be gratified to hear a reply to the same from thy lips. 49. What is bondage? Forsooth, how has it come upon the self? How does it continue to exist? How is one freed from it? What is this non-self? And who is the Supreme Self? And how can one discriminate between them? Do tell me about all these. 50. The Guru replied, Blessed art thou. Thou hast achieved thy life's end and hast sanctified thy family, that thou wishest to attain Brahmanhood by getting free from the bondage of ignorance. 51. A father has got his sons and others to free him from his debts, but he has got none but himself to remove his bondage. 52. Trouble such as that caused by a load on the head can be removed by others, but known by one's own self can put a stop to the pain which is caused by hunger and the like. 53. The patient who takes the proper diet and medicine is alone seen to recover completely, not through work done by others. 54. The true nature of things is to be known personally, through the eye of clear illumination, and not through a sage. What the moon exactly is to be known with one's own eyes. Can others make him know it? 55. Who but one's own self can get rid of the bondage caused by the fetters of ignorance, desire, action and the like, even in 100 crore of cycles? 56. Neither by yoga, nor by sankhya, nor by work, nor by learning, but by the realization of one's identity with Brahman is liberation possible, and by no other means. 57. The beauty of a guitar's form and the skill of playing on its chords serve merely to please a few persons. They do not suffice to confer sovereignty. 58. Loud speech consisting of a shower of words. The skill in expounding the scriptures, and likewise erudition, these merely bring on a little personal enjoyment to the scholar, but are no good for liberation. 59. The study of the scriptures is useless so long as the highest truth is unknown, and it is equally useless when the highest truth has already been known. 60. The scriptures consisting of many words are a dense forest which merely causes the mind to ramble. Hence men of wisdom should earnestly set about knowing the true nature of the self. 61. For one who has been bitten by the serpent of ignorance, the only remedy is the knowledge of Brahman. Of what avail are the Vedas and other scriptures, mantras, sacred formulae, and medicines to such a one? 62. A disease does not leave off if one simply utter the name of the medicine without taking it. Similarly, without direct realization one cannot be liberated by the mere utterance of the word Brahman. 63. Without causing the objective universe to vanish and without knowing the truth of the self, how is one to achieve liberation by the mere utterance of the word Brahman? It would result merely in an effort of speech. 64. Without killing one's enemies, and possessing oneself of the splendor of the entire surrounding region, one cannot claim to be an emperor by merely saying, "I am an emperor." 65. As a treasure hidden underground requires, for its extraction, competent instruction, excavation, the removal of stones and other such things lying above it, and finally, grasping, but never comes out by being merely called out by name, so the transparent truth of the self, which is hidden by Maya and its effects, is to be attained through the instructions of a knower of Brahman, followed by reflection, meditation and so forth, but not through perverted arguments. 66. Therefore the wise should, as in the case of disease and the like, personally strive by all the means in their power to be free from the bondage of repeated births and deaths. 67. The question that thou hast asked today is excellent, approved by those versed in the scriptures, aphoristic, pregnant with meaning and fit to be known by the seekers after liberation. 68. Listen attentively, O learned one, to what I am going to say. By listening to it thou shalt be instantly free from the bondage of samsara. 69. The first step to liberation is the extreme aversion to all perishable things. Then follow calmness, self-control, forbearance, and the utter relinquishment of all work enjoined in the scriptures. 70. Then come hearing, reflection on that, and long, constant and unbroken meditation on the truth for the muni. After that the learned seeker attains the supreme nirvikalpa state and realizes the bliss of nirvana even in this life. 71. Now I am going to tell thee fully about what thou oughtst to know, the discrimination between the self and the non-self. Listen to it and decide about it in thy mind. 72. Composed of the 7 ingredients, viz., marrow, bones, fat, flesh, blood, skin and cuticle, and consisting of the following limbs and their parts: legs, thighs, the chest, arms, the back and the head. 73. This body, reputed to be the abode of the delusion of I and mine, is designated Bisages as the gross body. The sky, air, fire, water and earth are subtle elements. They, 74, being united with parts of one another and becoming gross, they form the gross body, and their subtle essences form sense objects, the group of 5 such as sound, which conduce to the happiness of the experiencer. The individual soul, 75. Those fools who are tied to these sense objects by the stout cord of attachment. Savri difficult to snap, come and depart, up and down, carried amain by the powerful emissary of their past action. 76. The deer, the elephant, the moth, the fish and the black bee, these 5 have died, being tied to one or other of the 5 senses, viz., sound etc., through their own attachment. What then is in store for man who is attached to all these 5? 77. Sense objects are even more virulent in their evil effects than the poison of the cobra. Poison kills one who takes it, but those others kill one who even looks at them through the eyes. 78. He who is free from the terrible snare of the hankering after sense objects, so very difficult to get rid of, is alone fit for liberation, and none else, even though he be versed in all the 6 Shastras. 79. The shark of hankering catches by the throat those seekers after liberation who have got only an apparent dispassion, vairagya, and are trying to cross the ocean of samsara, relative existence, and violently snatching them away, drowns them halfway. 80. He who has killed the shark known as sense object with the sword of mature dispassion, crosses the ocean of samsara, free from all obstacles. 81. Know that death quickly overtakes the stupid man who walks along the dreadful ways of sense pleasure, whereas one who walks in accordance with the instructions of a well-wishing and worthy guru, as also with his own reasoning, achieves his end. Know this to be true. 82. If indeed thou hast a craving for liberation, shun sense objects from a good distance as thou wouldst do poison, and always cultivate carefully the nectar-like virtues of contentment, compassion, forgiveness, straightforwardness, calmness and self-control. 83. Whoever leaves aside what should always be attempted, viz., emancipation from the bondage of ignorance without beginning, and passionately seeks to nourish this body, which is an object for others to enjoy, commits suicide thereby. 84. Whoever seeks to realize the self by devoting himself to the nourishment of the body, proceeds to cross a river by catching hold of a crocodile, mistaking it for a log. 85. So for a seeker after liberation the infatuation over things like the body is a dire death. He who has thoroughly conquered this deserves the state of freedom. 86. Conquer the dire death of infatuation over thy body, wife, children etc., conquering which the sages reach that supreme state of Vishnu. 87. This gross body is to be deprecated, for it consists of the skin, flesh, blood, arteries and veins, fat, marrow and bones, and is full of other offensive things. 88. The gross body is produced by one's past actions out of the gross elements formed by the union of the subtle elements with each other, and is the medium of experience for the soul. That is its waking state in which it perceives gross objects. 89. Identifying itself with this form, the individual soul, though separate, enjoys gross objects, such as garlands and sandal paste, by means of the external organs. Hence this body has its fullest play in the waking state. 90. Know this gross body to be like a house to the householder, on which rests manentire dealing with the external world. 91. Birth, decay and death are the various characteristics of the gross body, as also stoutness etc., childhood etc., are its different conditions. It has got various restrictions regarding castes and orders of life. It is subject to various diseases, and meets with different kinds of treatment, such as worship, insult and high honors. 92. The ears, skin, eyes, nose and tongue are organs of knowledge, for they help us to recognize objects. The vocal organs, hands, legs, etc., are organs of action, owing to their tendency to work. 93 to 94. The inner organ, antakarana, is called manas, buddhi, ego or chitta, according to their respective functions. Manas, from its considering the pros and cons of a thing. Buddhi, from its property of determining the truth of objects. The ego, from its identification with this body as one's own self. And chitta, from its function of remembering things it is interested in. 95. One and the same prana, vital force, becomes prana, apana, vyana, udana and samana according to their diversity of functions and modifications. Like gold, water, etc. 96. The 5 organs of action such as speech. The 5 organs of knowledge such as the ear. The group of 5 pranas. The 5 elements ending with the ether. Together with buddhi and the rest as also nescience. Desire and action, these 8 cities make up what is called the subtle body. 97. Listen, this subtle body, called also the linga body, is produced out of the elements before their subdividing and combining with each other. Is possessed of latent impressions and causes the soul to experience the fruits of its past actions. It is a beginningless superimposition on the soul brought on by its own ignorance. 98 to 99. Dream is a state of the soul distinct from the waking state, where it shines by itself. In dreams buddhi, by itself, takes on the role of the agent and the like, owing to various latent impressions of the waking state, while the Supreme Atman shines in its own glory, with buddhi as its only superimposition. The witness of everything, and is not touched by the least work that buddhi does. As it is wholly unattached, it is not touched by any work that its superimpositions may perform. 100. This subtle body is the instrument for all activities of the Atman, who is knowledge absolute, like the adze and other tools of a carpenter. Therefore this Atman is perfectly unattached. 101. Blindness, weakness and sharpness are conditions of the eye, due merely to its fitness or defectiveness. So are deafness, dumbness, etc., of the ear and so forth, but never of the Atman, the knower. 102. Inhalation and exhalation, yawning, sneezing, secretion, leaving this body, etc., are called by experts functions of prana and the rest, while hunger and thirst are characteristics of prana proper. 103. The inner organ, mind, has its seat in the organs such as the eye, as well as in the body, identifying with them and endued with a reflection of the Atman. 104. Know that it is egoism which, identifying itself with the body, becomes the doer or experiencer, and in conjunction with the gunas such as the sattva, assumes the 3 different states. 105. When sense objects are favorable it becomes happy, and it becomes miserable when the case is contrary. So happiness and misery are characteristics of egoism, and not of the ever blissful Atman. 106. Sense objects are pleasurable only as dependent on the Atman manifesting through them, and not independently, because the Atman is by its very nature the most beloved of all. Therefore the Atman is ever blissful, and never suffers misery. 107. That in profound sleep we experience the bliss of the Atman independent of sense objects, is clearly attested by the Shruti, direct perception, tradition and inference. 108. Avidya, nescience, or Maya, called also the undifferentiated, is the power of the Lord. She is without beginning, is made up of the 3 gunas and is superior to the effects. As their cause, she is to be inferred by one of clear intellect only from the effects she produces. It is she who brings forth this whole universe. 109. She is neither existent nor non-existent nor partaking of both characters, neither same nor different nor both, neither composed of parts nor an indivisible whole nor both. She is most wonderful and cannot be described in words. 110. Maya can be destroyed by the realization of the pure Brahman, the one without a second, just as the mistaken idea of a snake is removed by the discrimination of the rope. She has her gunas as rajas, tamas and sattva, named after their respective functions. 111. Rajas has its vikshepa shakti or projecting power, which is of the nature of an activity, and from which this primeval flow of activity has emanated. From this also, mental modifications such as attachment and grief are continually produced. 112. Lust, anger, avarice, arrogance, spite, egoism, envy, jealousy, etc. These are the dire attributes of rajas, from which the worldly tendency of man is produced. Therefore rajas is a cause of bondage. 113. Avriti or the veiling power is the power of tamas, which makes things appear other than what they are. It is this that causes man's repeated transmigrations, and starts the action of the projecting power. Vikshepa. 114. Even wise and learned men who are clever and adept in the vision of the exceedingly subtle Atman are overpowered by tamas and do not understand the Atman, even though clearly explained in various ways. What is simply superimposed by delusion, they consider as true, and attach themselves to its effects. Alas! How powerful is the great Avriti Shakti of dreadful tamas. 115. Absence of the right judgment, or contrary judgment, want of definite belief and doubt, these certainly never desert one who has any connection with this veiling power. And then the projecting power gives ceaseless trouble. 116. Ignorance, lassitude, dullness, sleep, inadvertence, stupidity, etc. are attributes of tamas. One tied to these does not comprehend anything, but remains like one asleep or like a stock or stone. 117. Pure sattva is clear, like water, yet in conjunction with rajas and tamas it makes for transmigration. The reality of the Atman becomes reflected in sattva and like the sun reveals the entire world of matter. 118. The traits of mixed sattva are an utter absence of pride etc. and niyama, yama, etc., as well as faith, devotion, yearning for liberation, the divine tendencies and turning away from the unreal. 119. The traits of pure sattva are cheerfulness, the realization of one's own self, supreme peace, contentment, bliss, and steady devotion to the Atman, by which the aspirant enjoys bliss everlasting. 120. This indifferentiated, spoken of as the compound of the three gunas, is the causal body of the soul. Profound sleep is its special state, in which the functions of the mind and all its organs are suspended. 121. Profound sleep is the cessation of all kinds of perception, in which the mind remains in a subtle seed-like form. The test of this is the universal verdict. I did not know anything then. 122. The body, organs, pranas, manas, egoism, etc., all modifications, the sense objects, pleasure and the rest, the gross elements such as the ether, in fact, the whole universe, up to the indifferentiated, all this is the non-self. 123. From Mahat down to the gross body everything is the effect of Maya. These and Maya itself know thou to be the non-self, and therefore unreal like the mirage in a desert. 124. Now I am going to tell thee of the real nature of the Supreme Self, realizing which man is freed from bondage and attains liberation. 125. There is some absolute entity, the eternal substratum of the consciousness ophagoism, the witness of the three states, and distinct from the five sheaths or coverings. 126. Which knows everything that happens in the waking state, in dream and in profound sleep, which is aware of the presence or absence of the mind and its functions, and which is the background of the notion of egoism. This is that. 127. Which itself sees all, but which no one beholds, which illumines the intellect, etc., but which they cannot illumine. This is that. 128. By which this universe is pervaded, but which nothing pervades, which shining, all this universe shines as its reflection. This is that. 129. By whose very presence the body, the organs, mind and intellect keep to the irrespective spheres of action, like servants. 130. By which everything from egoism down to the body, the sense objects and pleasure, etc., is known as palpably as a jar, for it is the essence of eternal knowledge. 131. This is the innermost self, the primeval Purusha, being, whose essence is the constant realization of infinite bliss, which is ever the same, yet reflecting through the different mental modifications, and commanded by which the organs and pranas perform their functions. 132. In this very body, in the mind full of sattva, in the secret chamber of the intellect, in the akasha known as the unmanifested, the Atman, of charming splendor, shines like the sun aloft, manifesting this universe through its own effulgence. 133. The knower of the modifications of mind and egoism, and of the activities of the body, the organs and pranas, apparently taking their forms, like the fire in a ball of iron. It neither acts nor is subject to change in the least. 134. It is neither born nor dies. It neither grows nor decays, nor does it undergo any change. Being eternal, it does not cease to exist even when this body is destroyed. Like the sky in a jar, after it is broken, for it is independent. 135. The Supreme Self, different from the Prakriti and its modifications, of the essence of pure knowledge, and absolute, directly manifests this entire gross and subtle universe, in the waking and other states, as the substratum of the persistent sense of egoism, and manifests itself as the witness of the buddhi, the determinative faculty. 136. By means of a regulated mind and the purified intellect. Buddhi, realize directly thy own self in the body so as to identify thyself with it. Cross the boundless ocean of samsara whose waves are birth and death, and firmly established in Brahman as thy own essence. Be blessed. 137. Identifying the self with this non-self, this is the bondage of man, which is due to his ignorance, and brings in its train the miseries of birth and death. It is through this that one considers this evanescent body as real, and identifying oneself with it, nourishes, bathes, and preserves it by means of agreeable sense objects, by which he becomes bound as the caterpillar by the threads of its cocoon. 138. One who is overpowered by ignorance mistakes a thing for what it is not. It is the absence of discrimination that causes one to mistake a snake for a rope, and great dangers overtake him when he seizes it through that wrong notion. Hence, listen, my friend, it is the mistaking of transitory things as real that constitutes bondage. 139. This veiling power, avriti, which preponderates in ignorance, covers the self, whose glories are infinite and which manifests itself through the power of knowledge. Indivisible, eternal and one without a second, as Rahu does the orb of the sun. 140. When his own self, endowed with the purest splendor, is hidden from view, a man through ignorance falsely identifies himself with this body, which is the non-self. And then the great power of rajas called the projecting power sorely afflicts him through the binding fetters of lust, anger, etc. 141. The man of perverted intellect, having his self-knowledge swallowed up by the shark of utter ignorance, himself imitates the various states of the intellect, buddhi, as that is its superimposed attribute, and drifts up and down in this boundless ocean of samsara which is full of the poison of sense enjoyment, now sinking, now rising, a miserable fate indeed. 142. As layers of clouds generated by the sun's rays cover the sun and alone appear in the sky, so egoism generated by the self covers the reality of the self and appears by itself. 143. Just as, on a cloudy day, when the sun is swallowed up by dense clouds, violent cold blasts trouble them, so when the Atman is hidden by intense ignorance, the dreadful Vikshepa Shakti, projecting power, afflicts the foolish man with numerous griefs. 144. It is from these two powers that man's bondage has proceeded, beguiled by which he mistakes the body for the self and wanders from body to body. 145. Of the tree of samsara, ignorance is the seed. The identification with the body is its sprout, attachment its tender leaves, work its water, the body its trunk, the vital forces its branches, the organs its twigs, the sense objects its flowers. Various miseries due to diverse works are its fruits, and the individual soul is the bird on it. 146. This bondage of the non-self springs from ignorance, is self-caused, and is described as without beginning and end. It subjects one to the long train of miseries such as birth, death, disease and decrepitude. 147. This bondage can be destroyed neither by weapons nor by wind, nor by fire, nor by millions of acts, by nothing except the wonderful sword of knowledge that comes of discrimination, sharpened by the grace of the Lord. 148. One who is passionately devoted to the authority of the Shrutis acquires steadiness in his Svadharma, which alone conduces to the purity of his mind. The man of pure mind realizes the Supreme Self, and by this alone samsara with its root is destroyed. 149. Covered by the five sheaths, the material one and the rest, which are the products of its own power, the self ceases to appear, like the water of a tank by its accumulation of sedge. 150. On the removal of that sedge, the perfectly pure water that allays the pangs of thirst and gives immediate joy, appears unobstructed before the man. 151. When all the five sheaths have been eliminated, the self of man appears, pure, of the essence of everlasting and unalloyed bliss, indwelling, supreme and self-effulgent. 152. To remove his bondage, the wise man should discriminate between the self and then self. By that alone he comes to know his own self as existence, knowledge, bliss absolute, and becomes happy. 153. He indeed is free who discriminates between all sense objects and the indwelling, unattached and inactive self, as one separates a stalk of grass from its enveloping sheath, and merging everything in it, remains in a state of identity with that. 154. This body of ours is the product of food and comprises the material sheath. It lives on food and dies without it. It is a mass of skin, flesh, blood, bones and filth, and can never be the eternally pure, self-existent Atman. 155. It does not exist prior to inception or posterior to dissolution, but lasts only for a short, intervening period. Its virtues are transient, and it is changeful by nature. It is manifold, inert, and is a sense object. Like a jar, how can it be one's own self, the witness of changes in all things? 156. The body, consisting of arms, legs, etc., cannot be the Atman, for one continues to live even when particular limbs are gone, and the different functions of the organism also remain intact. The body which is subject to another's rule cannot be the self which is the ruler of all. 157. That the Atman as the abiding reality is different from the body. Its characteristics, its activities, its states, etc., of which it is the witness, is self-evident. 158. How can the body, being a pack of bones, covered with flesh, full of filth and highly impure. Be the self-existent Atman, the knower, which is ever distinct from it. 159. It is the foolish man who identifies himself with a mass of skin, flesh, fat, bones and filth, while the man of discrimination knows his own self, the only reality that there is, as distinct from the body. 160. The stupid man thinks he is the body. The book-learned man identifies himself with the mixture of body and soul, while the sage possessed of realization due to discrimination looks upon the eternal Atman as his self, and thinks, I am Brahman. 161. O foolish person, cease to identify thyself with this bundle of skin, flesh, fat, bones and filth, and identify thyself instead with the absolute Brahman, the self of all, and thus attain to supreme peace. 162. As long as the book-learned man does not give up his mistaken identification with the body, organs, etc., which are unreal, there is no talk of emancipation for him, even if he be ever so erudite in the Vedanta philosophy. 163. Just as thou dost not identify thyself with the shadow body, the image body, the dream body, or the body thou hast in the imaginations of thy heart, cease thou to do likewise with the living body also. 164. Identifications with the body alone is the root that produces the misery of birth, etc., of people who are attached to the unreal. Therefore destroy thou this with the utmost care. When this identification caused by the mind is given up, there is no more chance for rebirth. 165. The prana, with which we are all familiar, coupled with the 5 organs of action, forms the vital sheath, permeated by which the material sheath engages itself in all activities as if it were living. 166. Neither is the vital sheath the self, because it is a modification of vayu, and like the air it enters into and comes out of the body, and because it never knows in the least either its own weal and woe or those of others, being eternally dependent on the self. 167. The organs of knowledge together with the mind form the mental sheath, the cause of the diversity of things such as I and mine. It is powerful and endued with the faculty of creating differences of name, etc. It manifests itself as permeating the preceding, i.e., the vital sheath. 168. The mental sheath is the sacrificial fire which, fed with the fuel of numerous desires by the 5 sense organs which serve as priests, and set ablaze by the sense objects which act as the stream of oblations, brings about this phenomenal universe. 169. There is no ignorance, avidya, outside the mind. The mind alone is avidya, the cause of the bondage of transmigration. When that is destroyed, all else is destroyed, and when it is manifested, everything else is manifested. 170. In dreams, when there is no actual contact with the external world, the mind alone creates the whole universe consisting of the experiencer, etc. Similarly in the waking state also, there is no difference. Therefore all this phenomenal universe is the projection of the mind. 171. In dreamless sleep, when the mind is reduced to its causal state, there exists nothing for the person asleep, as is evident from universal experience. Hence man's relative existence is simply the creation of his mind, and has no objective reality. 172. Clouds are brought in by the wind and again driven away by the same agency. Similarly, man's bondage is caused by the mind, and liberation too is caused by that alone. 173. It, first, creates an attachment in man for the body and all other sense objects, and binds him through that attachment like a beast by means of ropes. Afterwards, the self-same mind creates in the individual an utter distaste for these sense objects as if they were poison. and frees him from the bondage. 174. Therefore the mind is the only cause that brings about man's bondage or liberation. When tainted by the effects of rajas, it leads to bondage. And when pure and divested of the rajas and tamas elements, it conduces to liberation. 175. Attaining purity through a preponderance of discrimination and renunciation. The mind makes for liberation. Hence the wise seeker after liberation must first strengthen these two. 176. In the forest tract of sense pleasures there prowls a huge tiger called the mind. Let good people who have a longing for liberation never go there. 177. The mind continually produces for the experiencer all sense objects without exception, whether perceived as gross or fine. The differences of body, caste, order of life, and tribe, as well as the varieties of qualification, action, means and results. 178. Deluding the jiva, which is unattached pure intelligence, and binding it by the ties of body, organs and pranas. The mind causes it to wander, with ideas of I and mine, amidst the varied enjoyment of results achieved by itself. 179. Man's transmigration is due to the evil of superimposition, and the bondage of superimposition is created by the mind alone. It is this that causes the misery of birth, etc. for the man of non-discrimination who is tainted by rajas and tamas. 180. Hence sages who have fathomed its secret have designated the mind as avidya or ignorance, by which alone the universe is moved to and fro, like masses of clouds by the wind. 181. Therefore the seeker after liberation must carefully purify the mind. When this is purified, liberation is as easy of access as a fruit on the palm of one's hand. 182. He who by means of one-pointed devotion to liberation roots out the attachment to sense objects, renounces all actions, and with faith in the real Brahman regularly practices hearing, etc., succeeds in purging the rajasika nature of the intellect. 183. Neither can the mental sheath be the supreme self, because it has a beginning and an end, is subject to modifications, is characterized by pain and suffering, and is an object, whereas the subject can never be identified with the objects of knowledge. 184. The body with its modifications and the organs of knowledge forms the Vijnanamaya kosha or knowledge sheath of the agent, having the characteristics which is the cause of man's transmigration. 185. This knowledge sheath, which seems to be followed by a reflection of the power of the chit, is a modification of the prakriti, is endowed with the function of knowledge, and always wholly identifies itself with the body, organs, etc. 186 to 187. It is without beginning, characterized by egoism, is called the jiva, and carries on all the activities on the relative plane. Through previous desires it performs good and evil actions and experiences their results. Being born in various bodies, it comes and goes, up and down. It is this knowledge sheath that has the waking, dream and other states, and experiences joy and grief. 188. It always mistakes the duties, functions and attributes of the orders of life which belong to the body as its own. The knowledge sheath is exceedingly effulgent, owing to its close proximity to the Supreme Self, which identifying itself with it suffers transmigration through delusion. It is therefore a superimposition on the self. 189. The self-effulgent Atman, which is pure knowledge, shines in the midst of the pranas, within the heart. Though immutable, it becomes the agent and experiencer owing to its superimposition. The knowledge sheath. 190. Though the self of everything that exists, this Atman, itself assuming the limitations of the body and wrongly identifying itself with this totally unreal entity, looks upon itself as something different, like earthen jars from the clay of which they are made. 191. Owing to its connection with the superimpositions, the Supreme Self, even thou naturally perfect, transcending nature, and eternally unchanging, assumes the qualities of the superimpositions and appears to act just as they do, like the changeless fire assuming the modifications of the iron which it turns red hot. 192. The disciple questioned, be it through delusion or otherwise, that the Supreme Self has come to consider itself as the jiva. This superimposition is without beginning, and that which has no beginning cannot be supposed to have an end either. 193. Therefore the jivahood of the soul also must have no end, and its transmigration must continue forever. How then can there be liberation for the soul? Kindly enlighten me on this point, O revered Master. 194. The teacher said, Thou hast rightly questioned, O learned man. Listen therefore attentively. The imagination which has been conjured up by delusion can never be accepted as a fact. 195. But for delusion there can be no connection of the self, which is unattached, beyond activity and formless, with the objective world, as in the case of blueness etc., with reference to the sky. 196. The jivahood of the Atman, the witness, which is beyond qualities and beyond activity, and which is realized within as knowledge and bliss absolute, has been superimposed by the delusion of the body, and is not real, and because it is by nature an unreality, it ceases to exist when the delusion is gone. 197. It exists only so long as the delusion lasts, being caused by indiscrimination due to an illusion. The rope is supposed to be the snake only so long as the mistake lasts, and there is no more snake when the illusion has vanished. Similar is the case here. 198 to 199. Avidya or nescience and its effects are likewise considered as beginningless. But with the rise of vidya or realization, the entire effects of avidya, even though beginningless, are destroyed together with their root, like dreams on waking up from sleep. It is clear that the phenomenal universe, even though without beginning, is not eternal, like previous non-existence. 200 to 201. Previous non-existence, even though beginningless, is observed to have an end. So the jivahood which is imagined to be in the Atman through its relation with superimposed attributes such as the body, is not real, whereas the other, the Atman, is essentially different from it. The relation between the Atman and the body is due to a false knowledge. 202. The cessation of that superimposition takes place through perfect knowledge, and by no other means. Perfect knowledge, according to the Shrutis, consists in the realization of the identity of the individual soul in Brahman. 203. This realization is attained by a perfect discrimination between the self and Thenan self. Therefore one must strive for the discrimination between the individual soul and the eternal self. 204. Just as the water which is very muddy again appears as transparent water when the mud is removed, so the Atman also manifests its undimmed luster when the taint has been removed. 205. When the unreal ceases to exist, this very individual soul is definitely realized as the eternal self. Therefore one must make it a point completely to remove things like egoism from the eternal self. 206. This knowledge sheath, Vijnanamaya Kosha, that we have been speaking of, cannot be the Supreme Self for the following reasons: because it is subject to change, is insentient, is a limited thing, an object of the senses, and is not constantly present. An unreal thing cannot indeed be taken for the real Atman. 207. The blissful sheath, Anandamaya Kosha, is that modification of nescience which manifests itself catching a reflection of the Atman which is bliss absolute, whose attributes are pleasure and the rest. and which appears in view when some object agreeable to oneself presents itself. It makes itself spontaneously felt by the fortunate during the fruition of their virtuous deeds, from which every corporeal being derives great joy without the least effort. 208. The blissful sheath has its fullest play during profound sleep, while in the dreaming and wakeful states it has only a partial manifestation, occasioned by the sight of agreeable objects and so forth. 209. Nor is the blissful sheath the supreme self, because it is endowed with the changeful attributes, is a modification of the prakriti, is the effect of past good deeds, and embedded in the other sheaths which are modifications. 210. When all the 5 sheaths have been eliminated by the reasoning on Shruti passages, what remains as the culminating point of the process is the witness, the knowledge absolute, the Atman. 211. This self-effulgent Atman which is distinct from the 5 sheaths, the witness of the 3 states, the real, the changeless, the untainted, the everlasting bliss, is to be realized by the wise man as his own self. 212. The disciple questioned, after these 5 sheaths have been eliminated as unreal, I find nothing, O Master, in this universe but a void, the absence of everything. What entity is there left forsooth with which the wise knower of the self should realize his identity? 213-214. The Guru answered, Thou hast rightly said, O learned man, thou art clever indeed in discrimination, that by which all those modifications such as egoism as well as their subsequent absence during deep sleep are perceived, but which itself is not perceived. Know thou that Atman, the knower, through the sharpest intellect. 215. That which is perceived by something else has for its witness the latter. When there is no agent to perceive a thing, we cannot speak of it as having been perceived at all. 216. This Atman is a self-cognized entity because it is cognized by itself. Hence the individual soul is itself and directly the supreme Brahman, and nothing else. 217. That which clearly manifests itself in the states of wakefulness, dream and profound sleep, which is inwardly perceived in the mind in various forms as an unbroken series of egoistic impressions, which witnesses the egoism, the body, etc., which are of diverse forms and modifications, and which makes itself felt as the existence knowledge bliss absolute. Know thou this Atman, thy own self, within thy heart. 218. Seeing the reflection of the sun mirrored in the water of a jar, the fool thinks it is the sun itself. Similarly the stupid man, through delusion, identifies himself with the reflection of the chit caught in the buddhi, which is its superimposition. 219. Just as the wise man leaves aside the jar, the water and the reflection of the sun in it, and sees the self-luminous sun which illumines these 3 and is independent of them. 220-222. Similarly, discarding the body, the buddhi and the reflection of the chit in it, and realizing the witness, the self, the knowledge absolute, the cause of the manifestation of everything, which is hidden in the recesses of the buddhi, is distinct from the gross and subtle, eternal, omnipresent, all-pervading and extremely subtle, and which has neither interior nor exterior and is identical with oneself. Fully realizing this true nature of oneself, one becomes free from sin, taint, death and grief, and becomes the embodiment of bliss. Illumined himself, he is afraid of none. For a seeker after liberation there is no other way to the breaking of the bonds of transmigration than the realization of the truth of one's own self. 223. The realization of one's identity with Brahman is the cause of liberation from the bonds of samsara, by means of which the wise man attains Brahman, the one without a second, the bliss absolute. 224. Once having realized Brahman, one no longer returns to the realm of transmigration. Therefore one must fully realize one's identity with Brahman. 225. Brahman is existence, knowledge, infinity, pure, supreme, self-existent, eternal and indivisible bliss, not different, in reality, from the individual soul, and devoid of interior or exterior. It is, ever, triumphant. 226. It is this supreme oneness which alone is real, since there is nothing else but the self. Verily, there remains no other independent entity in the state of realization of the highest truth. 227. All this universe which through ignorance appears as of diverse forms, is nothing else but Brahman, which is absolutely free from all the limitations of human thought. 228. A jar, though a modification of clay, is not different from it. Everywhere the jar is essentially the same as the clay. Why then call it a jar? It is fictitious, a fancied name merely. 229. None can demonstrate that the essence of a jar is something other than the clay of which it is made. Hence the jar is merely imagined as separate, through delusion, and the component clay alone is the abiding reality in respect of it. 230. Similarly, the whole universe, being the effect of the real Brahman, is in reality nothing but Brahman. Its essence is that, and it does not exist apart from it. He who says it does is still under delusion, he babbles like one asleep. 231. This universe is verily Brahman, such is the august pronouncement of the Atharva Veda. Therefore this universe is nothing but Brahman. For that which is superimposed on something has no separate existence from its substratum. 232. If the universe, as it is, be real, there would be no cessation of the dualistic element. The scriptures would be falsified, and the Lord himself would be guilty of an untruth. None of these three is considered either desirable or wholesome by the noble-minded. 233. The Lord, who knows the secret of all things, has supported this view in the words, "But I am not in them, nor are the beings in me." 234. If the universe be true, let it then be perceived in the state of deep sleep also. As it is not at all perceived, it must be unreal and false, like dreams. 235. Therefore the universe does not exist apart from the Supreme Self, and the perception of its separateness is false, like the qualities of blueness, etc. in the sky. Has a superimposed attribute any meaning apart from its substratum? It is the substratum which appears like that through delusion. 236. Whatever a deluded man perceives through mistake is Brahman and Brahman alone. The silver is nothing but the mother of pearl. It is Brahman which is always considered as this universe, whereas that which is superimposed on the Brahman, viz., the universe, is merely a name. 237 to 238. Hence whatever is manifested, viz., this universe, is the supreme Brahman itself, the real, the one without a second, pure, the essence of knowledge, taintless, serene, devoid of beginning and end, beyond activity, the essence of bliss absolute, transcending all the diversities created by Maya or nescience, eternal, ever beyond the reach of pain, indivisible, immeasurable, formless, indifferentiated, nameless, immutable, self-luminous. 239. Sages realize the supreme truth, Brahman, in which there is no differentiation of knower, knowledge and known, which is infinite, transcendent, and the essence of knowledge absolute. 240. Which can be neither thrown away nor taken up, which is beyond the reach of mind and speech, immeasurable, without beginning and end, the whole, one's very self, and of surpassing glory. 241 to 242. If thus the Shruti, in the dictum, thou art that, Tatti Vamasi, repeatedly establishes the absolute identity of Brahman, or Ishvara, and Jiva, denoted by the terms that, tat, and thou, tivam, respectively, divesting these terms of their relative associations. Then it is the identity of their implied, not literal, meanings which is sought to be inculcated, for they are of contradictory attributes to each other, like the sun and a glowworm, the king and a servant, the ocean and a well, or Mount Meru and an atom. 243. This contradiction between them is created by superimposition, and is not something real. This superimposition, in the case of Ishvara, the Lord, is Maya or nescience, which is the cause of Mahat and the rest, and in the case of the Jiva, the individual soul, listen, the 5 sheaths, which are the effects of Maya, stand for it. 244. These two are the superimpositions of Ishvara and the Jiva respectively. And when these are perfectly eliminated, there is neither Ishvara nor Jiva. A kingdom is the symbol of a king, and a shield of the soldier. And when these are taken away, there is neither king nor soldier. 245. The Vedas themselves in the words, now then is the injunction, etc., repudiate the duality imagined in Brahman. One must needs eliminate those two superimpositions by means of realization supported by the authority of the Vedas. 246. Neither this gross nor this subtle universe is the Atman, being imagined. They are not real, like the snake seen in the rope, and like dreams perfectly eliminating the objective world in this way by means of reasoning. One should next realize the oneness that underlies Ishvara and the Jiva. 247. Hence those two terms, Ishvara and Jiva, must be carefully considered through their implied meanings, so that their absolute identity may be established. Neither the method of total rejection nor that of complete retention will do. One must reason out through the process which combines the two. 248 to 249. Just as in the sentence, this is that Devadatta, the identity is spoken of, eliminating the contradictory portions. So in the sentence, thou art that, the wise man must give up the contradictory elements on both sides and recognize the identity of Ishvara and Jiva, noticing carefully the essence of both, which is Chit, knowledge, absolute. Thus hundreds of scriptural texts inculcate the oneness and identity of Brahman and Jiva. 250. Eliminating the not-self. In the light of such passages as it is not gross, etc., one realizes the Atman, which is self-established, unattached like the sky, and beyond the range of thought. Therefore dismiss this mere phantom of a body which thou perceivest and hast accepted as thy own self. By means of the purified understanding that thou art Brahman, realize thy own self, the knowledge absolute. 251. All modifications of clay, such as the jar, which are always accepted by the Mindus real, are, in reality, nothing but clay. Similarly, this entire universe which is produced from the real Brahman, is Brahman itself and nothing but that, because there is nothing else whatever but Brahman, and that is the only self-existent reality, our very self. Therefore art thou that serene, pure, supreme Brahman, the one without a second. 252. As the place, time, objects, knower, etc., called up in dream are all unreal, so is also the world experienced here in the waking state, for it is all an effect of one's own ignorance. Because this body, the organs, the pranas, egoism, etc., are also thus unreal. Therefore art thou that serene, pure, supreme Brahman, the one without a second. 253. What is erroneously supposed to exist in something is, when the truth about it has been known, nothing but that substratum, and not at all different from it. The diversified dream universe appears in, passes away in the dream itself. Does it appear on waking as something distinct from one's own self? 254. That which is beyond caste and creed, family and lineage, devoid of name and form, merit and demerit, transcending space, time and sense object, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 255. That supreme Brahman which is beyond the range of all speech, but accessible to the eye of pure illumination, which is pure, the embodiment of knowledge, the beginningless entity, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 256. That which is untouched by the sixfold wave, meditated upon by the yogi's heart but not grasped by the sense organs, which the body cannot know, and which is unimpeachable, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 257. That which is the substratum of the universe with its various subdivisions, which are all creations of delusion, which itself has no other support, which is distinct from the gross and subtle, which has no parts, and has verily no exemplar, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 258. That which is free from birth, growth, development, waste, disease and death, which is indestructible, which is the cause of the projection, maintenance and dissolution of the universe, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 259. That which is free from differentiation, whose essence is never non-existent, which is unmoved like the ocean without waves, the ever free, of indivisible form, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 260. That which, though one only, is the cause of the many, which refutes all other causes, but is itself without cause, distinct from Maya and its effect, the universe, and independent, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 261. That which is free from duality, which is infinite and indestructible, distinct from the universe and Maya, supreme, eternal, which is undying bliss, taintless, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 262. That reality which, though one, appears variously owing to delusion, taking on names and forms, attributes and changes, itself always unchanged, like gold in its modifications, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 263. That beyond which there is nothing, which shines even above Maya, which again is superior to its effect, the universe, the inmost self of all, free from differentiation, the real self, the existence knowledge bliss absolute, infinite and immutable, that Brahman art thou. Meditate on this in thy mind. 264. On the truth, inculcated above, one must oneself meditate in one's mind, through the intellect, by means of the recognized arguments. By that means one will realize the truth free from doubt, etc. Like water in the palm of one's hand. 265. Realizing in this body the knowledge absolute free from nescience and its effects like the king in an army, and being ever established in thy own self by resting on that knowledge. Merge the universe in Brahman. 266. In the cave of the buddhi there is the Brahman, distinct from the gross and subtle, the existence absolute, supreme, the one without a second. For one who lives in this cave as Brahman, O beloved, there is no more entrance into the mother's womb. 267. Even after the truth has been realized, there remains that strong, beginningless, obstinate impression that one is the agent and experiencer, which is the cause of one's transmigration. It has to be carefully removed by living in a state of constant identification with the Supreme Self. Sages call that liberation, which is the attenuation of vasanas, impressions, here and now. 268. The idea of me and mine in the body, organs, etc., which are the non-self, this superimposition the wise man must put a stop to. by identifying himself with the Atman. 269. Realizing thy own inmost self. The witness of the body and its modifications, and constantly revolving the positive thought. I am that. Conquer this identification with the non-self. 270. Relinquishing the observance of social formalities. Giving up all ideas of trimming up the body, and avoiding too much engrossment with the scriptures. Do away with the superimposition that has come upon thyself. 271. Owing to the desire to run after society, the passion for too much study of the scriptures and the desire to keep the body in good trim, people cannot attain to proper realization. 272. For one who seeks deliverance from the prison of this world, samsara, those three desires have been designated by the wise as strong iron fetters to shackle one's feet. He who is free from them truly attains to liberation. 273. The lovely odor of the agaru, agalakam, which is hidden by a powerful stench due to its contact with water etc., manifests itself as soon as the foreign smell has been fully removed by rubbing. 274. Like the fragrance of the sandal wood, the perfume of the Supreme Self, which is covered with the dust of endless, violent impressions embedded in the mind, when purified by the constant friction of knowledge, is, again, clearly perceived. 275. The desire for self-realization is obscured by innumerable desires for things other than the self. When they have been destroyed by the constant attachment to the self, the Atman clearly manifests itself of its own accord. 276. As the mind becomes gradually established in the inmost self, it proportionately gives up the desires for external objects. And when all such desires have been eliminated, there takes place the unobstructed realization of the Atman. 277. The yogi's mind dies, being constantly fixed on his own self. Thence follows the cessation of desires. Therefore do away with thy superimposition. 278. Tamas is destroyed by both sattva and rajas. Rajas by sattva, and sattva dies when purified. Therefore do away with thy superimposition through the help of sattva. 279. Knowing for certain that the prarabdha work will maintain this body, remain quiet and do away with thy superimposition carefully and with patience. 280. I am not the individual soul, but the Supreme Brahman, eliminating thus all that is not self. Do away with thy superimposition, which has come through the momentum of past impressions. 281. Realizing thyself as the self of all by means of scripture, reasoning and by thy own realization, do away thy superimposition, even when a trace of it seems to appear. 282. The sage has no connection with action, since he has no idea of accepting or giving up. Therefore, through constant engrossment on the Brahman, do away with thy superimposition. 283. Through the realization of the identity of Brahman and the soul, resulting from such great dicta as thou art that, do away with thy superimposition, with a view to strengthening thy identification with Brahman. 284. Until the identification with this body is completely rooted out, do away with thy superimposition with watchfulness and a concentrated mind. 285. So long as even a dream-like perception of the universe and souls persists, do away with thy superimposition, O learned man, without the least break. 286. Without giving the slightest chance to oblivion on account of sleep, concern in secular matters or the sense objects. Reflect on the self in thy mind. 287. Shunning from a safe distance the body which has come from impurities of the parents in itself, consists of flesh and impurities, as one does an outcast, be thou Brahman and realize the consummation of thy life. 288. Merging the finite soul in the Supreme Self, like the space enclosed by a jar in the infinite space, by means of meditation on their identity. Always keep quiet, O sage. 289. Becoming thyself the self-effulgent Brahman, the substratum of all phenomena, as that reality give up both the macrocosm and the microcosm, like two filthy receptacles. 290. Transferring the identification now rooted in the body to the Atman, the existence knowledge bliss absolute, and discarding the subtle body, be thou ever alone, independent,